Hi, thanks for your comments about suffering and craving and external conditions. I've definitely had my eye on those kind of concepts in recent years. For me personally, I struggle with being able to change when I want to change my external conditions, I need to care about it. I need to crave a change. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how can you care without caring?
Well, in Buddhist psychology, we distinguish two kinds of desire. So there's an unwholesome desire and a wholesome desire. So these are different words and different things altogether. So I wouldn't, the way I look at it, I wouldn't say you crave a change. So the distinction would be that craving tends to focus on feelings and desire for some particular feeling or some particular state of being. Whereas the wholesome kind of desire, which is called chanda or Dhamma chanda, is the desire to do. It's not the desire for the result of doing. So working. So some people work with craving. So the work itself is merely a means towards wealth, fame, status, and so on. That's like working with craving. Whereas someone who's working with wholesome desire or chanda really just wants to do a good job, loves the job, loves the challenge, and doesn't reject fame, status, all those things. If they come, they come. But the passion is the work itself. And this is the same with meditation. You can meditate with craving to get something and become something, which won't be very fulfilling. Or you have chanda, where you just love the process itself and the practice itself. So if you're in someone asked the Buddha, how do you decide, like what kind of friends to hang out with, or what kind of situation to accept and what kind of situation to walk away from, and on what criteria do you base these kind of choices? So the Buddha returned to this fundamental distinction of wholesome dhammas and unwholesome dhammas, and saying, if over a course of time you find that the wholesome, uplifting qualities in the heart increase and the negative qualities of the heart decrease, then that's something to continue. But if you find over a course of time that the unwholesome qualities, the negative qualities are increasing consistently and the positive qualities are weakening, then it's better to leave. That's not you have to recognize that it's not a good place for you, not a good thing for you. So this is a wise movement rather than like running away or following some kind of craving, but being very clear in your intention and what you hope to gain from making that kind of move.
Thank you.
Thank you for the very illuminating talk. You alluded a couple of times to this notion of a meditator perhaps becoming self-righteous or have some ego creep in, especially when dealing with a non-meditator.
Yeah.
How can one deal with becoming a fool letting those feelings come?
Well, again, I think that like arrogance and conceit are basically expressions of foolishness and blindness, and that it's the more that you reflect upon the causes and conditions that got you where you are today, then the less arrogant you are. When you reflect on all that you've received from your parents and your teachers and your mentors, and from books and from, how can you say that I'm special? Without all of those conditions, you wouldn't have anything that you have today. And I think that constant recollection of and developing that sense of gratitude for all that we've been given is the most effective antidote to that kind of arrogance. So that kind of idea, I'm a self-made man. I don't think such a thing exists. It seems to me very disrespectful to all the people that have helped us in our lives to take credit for those kind of things. I mean, even if you start with the very basics, if you have a really good brain, you didn't make that yourself. And if you have a very analytic brain, or you have good thinking, you're really smart, what is it that you have to use when you're reflecting and thinking and contemplating and coming up with all these incredible ideas? You have to use language. So you weren't born with language. You receive language firstly from your parents. So if your parents didn't teach you to speak the languages that you speak, you wouldn't be able to think in the way that you do right now. So right there. I mean, I find this a very good way of looking at things. So as it comes back to the point of the talk, what does it depend upon? Like if you see the like cartoon, the arrogant man or woman slips on a banana skin, falls over, everyone laughs. If it's an old man or an old lady, nobody laughs, But it's just, why is it? Because there's nothing so ugly as arrogance, is there? There's this, we feel this when, it's actually one arrogant people to. So even if you're a very sort of ambitious person, you want to get ahead in the world, you want to look in a worldly way, I mean, arrogance is, you're just creating enemies wherever you go. So it's both foolish, unnecessary, self-defeating, and just stupid, really. Yeah.
So on the topic of arrogance, I've worked here 10 years and I've never encountered any arrogance, fortunately. But tying those two last questions together, we're like in the middle of our annual review cycle where we have to look back and talk to our managers and get them to rate us.
Yeah.
Right? How does one, or I want to be promoted this year. I did work so hard, I want to be promoted. What do you have to say? And I'll be like, I'm going to quit, I don't get that job. I'm promoted.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very different kind of environment than one I live in. So I just try to kind of imagine what that would be like. No, I think if both the boss and the employee are well-intentioned and sincere, and there are certain criteria for advancement in the career, and it's up to you to explain why you think that you have fulfilled those criteria. It seems to me quite okay. I mean,
Another question. I was wondering if you can share a little bit about compassion towards animals as it relates to our diets. I have struggled with be vegetarian for long periods, and then because of cravings, I started eating meat again. And I've never really been able to. I'm very conflicted about it. I'm just wondering if you can share some thoughts.
Well, in Buddhism, we talk very much about the organic relationship between wisdom and compassion. That the wiser you are, the clearer you see things, and the more compassionate you become. So it's like you can't make a decision to be compassionate, but it's something that arises naturally when you become more and more aware of suffering, and particularly when there's unnecessary suffering, and when you can play a part in reducing unnecessary suffering. But I think it's a mistake to think that we should always have this feeling, this compassionate kind of feeling. That's not going to be there all the time. When there are these disasters and people talk about compassion fatigue, but you can't sustain that kind of emotion, for just over a long period of time. It's just too tiring. But it's more of a general motivation to reduce or even to eliminate suffering wherever it may be found. And something that emotion will just arise naturally, but it arises and passes away like any other feeling. But I think compassion as a basic kind of attitude to life is what can be cultivated. From Buddhist point of view, eating meat is not in itself immoral. The immoral, if you kill an animal yourself or encourage others to kill, take pleasure in others killing, and then eat, then that would be. But if you go to supermarket and there's some meat and you buy some meat, you've played no karmic part in the death of that particular creature. So on the karmic level, it's not significant, but that's only one aspect of whether or not. And I'm saying this not someone with a vested interest because I don't eat meat, but for me, the arguments against eating meat are that that knowing just the incredible cruelty involved in factory farming, then saying, although it's not immoral, or I just don't want to have anything to do with this at all. And also that given the incredible pressures on the world's resources, which are going to increase as the human population increases, eating meat is just is a very inefficient use of resources, because you're growing a large amount of crops to feed animals in order to get meat, and it can be like I can't remember the figure, something like 10 kilos of produce in order to get 1 kilo of meat. So and the use of water and the destruction of the environment is significant. So I just think that radically reducing meat consumption is going to be, actually it's not going to be any choice about it in the future. But my father is very poor, and in his family, and like working class people in England, 80, 90 years ago, people only eat meat once a week. It was like a real treat. It's only very recently you think like you should eat meat every day or every time you eat something. It's a very modern thing. But whether or not you become a complete vegetarian, and that's up to individual. But I think that it is worth considering reducing meat consumption just for in terms of impact on the environment, rather than as a moral issue or solely a moral issue.
I have a question about the Thai forest tradition. There are many different traditions and lineages of Buddhism. So, what are some of the most distinct features of this tradition? Do you have anything like someone defined a path or stages of training, especially for or is like more customized to each individual?
Well, from the time of the Buddha, there's been two main groups of monks. So you have monks who are living in the forest and in lonely places. It's life devoted to meditation and to training for enlightenment. And then you have monks living in close to villages and towns who would put more emphasis on academic study, and also more, we could say, priestly duties and teaching the local people. So that's been a feature of Theravada Buddhism throughout its history. In the 19th century, a very special figure appeared. His name was Lumpu Man, and he became a forest monk, and he was incredibly gifted, not only in terms of his own practice, but most unusually in his ability to lead others to enlightenment. And so most spiritual teachers, and whatever Buddhist tradition, or I don't know, other traditions, then maybe they have at best one or two great disciples. But Ajahn Mun had like 20 or 30, 40. This is absolutely unprecedented. And so this was the beginning of the Thai forest tradition throughout the early years of the 20th century, how Ajahn Mun and his disciples spread throughout northeast Thailand, and they were teaching their own disciples and establishing monasteries. And as over the course of the 20th century, within modern development and deforestation, that original kind of wandering life of the forest monk, which going back to the Buddha started to change, and monks started to establish monasteries, forest monasteries. And now in northeast Thailand, and often you can see like just completely huge deforested areas, and you see a big forest, and that's probably a monastery, because it's the monks who look after the trees and plant trees as well. So it developed, or it changed from primarily a kind of a wandering, itinerant monk tradition to a more fixed monastic tradition. And once it becomes more fixed monastic tradition, that monasteries start to accumulate followers and wealth, and so it becomes less austere than in the past. And so each monastic community struggles with that, just how to position itself with the growing development and ease of life. Or, for instance, do you have electricity in the monastery or not? This is one. So within the forest tradition, what distinguishes the Ajahn Mun tradition, or what we call the Thai forest tradition, from other forest traditions in the past, is that the monks adopted a very strict practice of the monastic discipline. So before that, in Thailand, you have forest monks, the groups and communities of forest monks appearing and disappearing, and teachers and lineages. We don't have the historical records for them. One, because people weren't so interested in keeping historical records in the past, such things. And secondly, with the destruction of Ayutthaya in the late 70s, all the historical records were destroyed, those that were in existence. But what was a significant event was that when the fourth Thai king was a monk before he became the king, and he instituted this reform of the monastic order, and he sent one of his disciples to Sri Lanka, and he came back with a lot of texts, like Vinaya texts of the monastic discipline. And he translated and wrote a book, very thick book called the Pubbasika Varnana. And this book became like the Bible of the forest monks. So before that, forest monks were not known for their strictness of their monastic discipline. A lot of them were known for psychic powers or for being kind of eccentric or whatever. But it's with Ajahn Mun that these two things came together, like the emphasis on meditation practice, ascetic practices, but also on the monastic discipline. So that's the particular or unique quality of this tradition. So the training itself will vary from monastery to monastery, but ideally the first 5 years of a monk's life are like apprenticeship, where he has to be with a teacher, and then after 5 years he has more freedom to go off alone or to visit and practice with other teachers. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. It's really wonderful, and I would like to let you know my favorite lecture I listen every day during work time is I listen to Ajahn Jayasaro. He's talking YouTube. So my question is you explain really detail how the mind in processing and how we take action to the outside world, but our mind is in training for more years while we grow up, so we kind of take action really fast, really training to deal with the external environment, for example, right speech. So when something happens, some scenario, you tend to action too fast before those mind processing happen. So end up you regret what you said or what action you have to take, and you become a repeat process. You kind of end up you hate yourself or something.
Yeah.
How to do it?
Well, firstly, making right speech like a real goal in your life, and secondly, to observe those occasions when you have spoken in a way that causes you some regret afterwards, and you can see some patterns there. Often it's stressed out, very busy, so your level of mindfulness quite low, and you have some other worries maybe. So these are kind of danger points. So this is something you bear in mind. You're having a conversation coming up, important conversation maybe, and you're aware, you're mindful. Yeah, I'm feeling pretty low right now. I have to be very careful of my speech and make this a real focus. The Buddha gave us some certain guidelines. There's 5 guidelines for right speech. It's like speech which is true, which is beneficial, which is timely. Some things that might be true and beneficial, but it's just not the right time and place. Like you're too emotional, or the other person's too emotional, or it's just not the right environment. So, is it the right time and place to speak with kindness and to speak politely? So these are like objects of mindfulness: true, beneficial, timely, kindly, and polite. So that keep bringing those things to your mind. But with more mindfulness, subjectively, it's not like something you can measure on a clock, but subjectively, it's as things kind of slow down. You know, it is analogous to if you have great sportsmen, whatever the sport, and you know the person who everyone says, yeah, the best player ever, like the genius player, and you say, what distinguishes the greatest sportsmen and women from others? And people always say, it seems like they have more time than everyone else. You know, so they have, you know, not in clock time, but they just seem to have more time. And this is something that comes with mindfulness. You just feel subjectively that it's times a little bit, in those kinds of situations, it's a little bit more slow. You have a little bit more time. Going on periods of retreat, meditation retreats, where they keep noble silence for 3 days or 7 days, 10 days or whatever, and experiencing an extended period of time where you don't speak at all, gives you a really incredible opportunity to observe all these habits of speech that we've developed, because you cannot express them. They come up in your mind, you know, and you can't speak them. So it gives you an insight into them that's very difficult to gain in an actual conversation, because everything's just going on too quickly. So mindfulness, being careful in like sort of dangerous times when you've lost it in the past, some periods of meditation retreat and absolute silence. These things can change these habits. Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time here today.
Yeah.
I'm curious. In my life, I've felt that religion has been a negative thing, something I've strongly avoided because of the negativity I've associated with it. Similarly, a lot of times I associate the word spiritualism to religion because of its association to the ideas of soul, extra earthly concept. I'm curious to get your thoughts on what spiritualism means in the context of Buddhism.
Yeah, it's not a word I've ever used actually. Don't really perceive it in those terms. I think that because of the sort of the hegemony of Western culture, that often you hear people say religion is this and religion is that, whereas in fact there are what I would call families of religions, and so the religions that grew up in the Middle East, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they form a particular family of religions, and there's a particular specific idea of what a religion is, and there are book religions, and we understand to be a religious person means acceptance of certain dogmas and trying to live your life according to those dogmas, or they give you your sense of support and so on. So I would say essentially those religions are belief systems. So when we say, I know I was myself, I just couldn't accept the dogmas of Christ, so I'm not a religious person, because I understood religion to mean that you accept the dogmas in your holy book and live by them, or try to. But my belief is that Buddhism is a different family of religions, or a kind of different species of religion. And to my mind, it's not a belief system, it's an education system. So it's a whole different idea about what is a religion and what does it mean to be religious. So, I've been talking a little bit about this kind of educational process as I understand it, and that sort of commitment to that process of education of your actions, your speech, your emotions. This is, for me, is what religion is about, at least a Buddhist religion. So in Buddhism, there is a role for faith, but it's a circumscribed one. and it's considered to be a tool, but kind of like a power tool. You have to use it very carefully in this education process, because if faith is not governed by wisdom and intelligence, then it very easily slips either into superstition or fanaticism. So therefore, what are the good things about it? Well, faith is just it focuses your mind, it prioritizes things in your life, and it gives rise to energy. So in the Buddhist education, you want that kind of focus and commitment and energy of faith, but without allowing it to fall into these extremes of fanaticism and superstition. And one of the most important words that in the Buddhist teaching that's not so well known is called satchanuraka, and that means caring for the truth. And the Buddha says you care for the truth when you don't claim that you know something, when you merely believe it. And the Buddha says, surely it's clear that we can have an absolute faith in something that's not true. That's a psychological truth. Even people who are, fanatically affiliated with a particular religion, they have to accept that, because they believe everybody who believes in other religions has a faith in something that's not true. So, but the mistake that's often made is it's kind of circular reasoning. You say, it's true. Why is it true? Well, the moment I read it, I just knew. I just read this, and no, that's not. That's belief. So, but it's this idea: it's true because I believe it, and I believe it because it's true. It's just you just can't. There's no, it's just a fixed, locked kind of worldview. But so when people look at Buddhism, they tend to assume it's another kind of belief. Oh, you're a Buddhist, so you believe in reincarnation, is that right? It's like that's your key defining belief in your belief system that's different from mine. But if someone was to say to a Buddhist, is reincarnation true? You would say, I don't know. I believe it's so, but I don't know. I don't have a direct experience of it as yet. I believe it is, and I have reasons to back up my belief, whether they're words of the Buddha himself, recollection of past lives by great monks and meditators, spontaneous past life memories of children throughout the world, past life memories of people under hypnosis. These are all, I think, quite weighty evidence supporting the hypothesis of rebirth. But it doesn't mean, therefore, it is true, and I'm going to, make my stand on that, because as a Buddhist, I have to care for the truth and say that I don't know. I believe it's so, yeah, I have a confidence in this, but I don't actually know. And I think this is something that sort of distinguishes Buddhism and was very attractive to me in Buddhism when I first began to study it.
Thank you.
Hi. I have a question that everyone must be facing a day-to-day basis. Like some people try to prove that right thing is wrong with their manipulative skills, and you know what is right, but you can't do anything. Or if you are trying to prove that this is right, and then your anger comes out, or you can't handle that thing, like why it is being wrong and why they are proving it wrong when it is right. So how to deal with it?
Well, if you go into a forest, and there are all these bugs, and they start biting you, and it's really painful. You don't like it, but you don't think, why are there these bugs in this forest? Why is this? Why are they here? Why are they doing this to me? Because this is what forests are like. This is where bugs live. Bugs live in a forest. And this is the human realm. It's like this. This is what people do. They're like this. So there are greedy and angry and selfish people in the world. And what can you do? All you can do is say, well, at the very least, I won't be greedy. I won't be angry. I won't misrepresent the truth for some personal gain. And I at least will try to uphold the truth and to share my commitment to the truth with the people I love and the people in my community. I think that's all you can do. But it's when you say it shouldn't be like that you really suffer. Why shouldn't it? Yeah, why shouldn't it? I mean, people are like that. That's the way they are.
We got one last question. I'll put real quick a plug. Who wants to go see Ajahn Jayasaro speak on Saturday because they can't get enough. It's at Abhayagiri Forest Monastery, Mendocino, 3-hour drive. Talk to me afterwards if you do carpal.
Thanks for your time today. Building on your previous comment on rebirth and the fact that Buddhism is more like an education system where there's several logical concepts that a rational mind, like a Western mind, can find appealing. One of the concepts that, for me personally, is kind of difficult to put together, or two concepts are, one, selflessness or anatta, and rebirth. I'd like you to comment a little bit about how those two things go together or don't go together.
Yeah, well, maybe I just make a point. I'm not trying to sort of promote kind of scientific, rational Buddhism here. But I think that just as like a third dimension doesn't negate a second dimension, so that the Buddha's teachings, more profound teachings, don't negate rationality. They include, incorporate them. My idea of this, way of talking about this is, everything is a verb, okay? There are no nouns, okay? So even nouns are verbs. The body's a verb. Thoughts are verbs. Emotions are verbs. Everything's a verb, okay? So it's we're still looking at the mind and this way in the kind of Newtonian billiard ball kind of style, where we need to go on. And in fact, the modern insight into sort of the flow of phenomena is very familiar to a Buddhist perspective. But if I may give you a more traditional example, is let's say you have a candle, you light a candle. What is the flame? Is that a thing? No, it is actually a process, isn't it? It's a reaction between the oxygen and the wick and so on. And so that candle flame burns down, and as the candle starts to run out, you can light the second candle from the first candle. But we wouldn't say that there's a thing called a flame which died from one candle and was reborn in another candle. There's a continuity of process. So that's the idea that the mind, the non-physical elements of the body are like a flow of phenomena, and that flow of phenomena does not come to an end with the destruction of its physical base. Okay. So, if you just look, what is, who are you right now? What right now? Is there a kind of a self? What would we even mean by that? So, where the Buddha is saying it's not this that you can attain an insight into this state called not self. The Buddha is merely pointing out a mistaken assumption, a mistaken perception, consciousness, that there is this independent, self-existent entity which is the owner of experience, is the and so it just challenges you to say, well, yeah, if that's what you think, see if you can find it. Is it in the body? Is it in feelings? Is it in perceptions? Is it in emotions, thoughts, views, opinions, beliefs, sense consciousness? Is it in some combination of them? What is this thing that you believe to be there, or is it just a superstition that you assume to be there? Again, if you're looking closely at the mind, let's say meditation, you're sitting there maybe quite calm, and then suddenly a thought comes into the mind. But where does that thought come from? You know, it's not like you decide to have a thought and produce a thought. But if you look closely, the thought comes, and the sense of ownership of the thought comes after the thought. It's an afterthought. It's something. So self is the idea of self is something that we are creating moment by moment, which we are superimposing on experience. And the good news is that you don't have to do that, and it feels a lot better not to do it. Yeah. That's it. Okay. Well, let's time up. Thank you for your patience. I'm sure it's not been very pleasant listening to my sore throated voice, but anyway, I hope that you've benefited to some degree from my visit today, and thank you for your attention.